Okay, so here we are with Mike. We're going to sit down and talk about his experience. So, Mike, go ahead and talk about your when you started.
Okay, that's a good place to start, is at the beginning. Prior to walking into Steve's studio in 1979, I had a little bit of experience in boxing, wrestling, and figured at 18 years old I knew that, okay, what I need now is to learn how to kick. So I specifically went out looking for a kicking style. I had heard of Hapkido or read of in a magazine, but that's about as far as I knew of Hapkido. So I'd been to a few studios, Tang Sudo, Taekwondo, and various other studios, and went through their intro classes and so forth, and never really got the feeling that that's what I want to do. However, one day I walked into Steve's studio, and when I walked in, Steve and one of his black belts had obviously just finished a intense sparring session, judging by the sweat and the exhausted looks on their faces as they were sitting on the mat talking about working out. And when I walked in and saw that, it struck me. It made me feel this is what I'm looking for. So that's my first recollection of Steve Sexton and the studio.
And this is the school on Van Owen.
This is the original school right. In Canoga Park on Topanga and Van Owen.
Right.
I walked in. Steve was very informal, very friendly, willing to answer any questions I had, encouraged me to come back and train, and it just felt right. The vibe of the studio, Steve's personality, I just knew that this was going to be a good fit. And
did you find him to be strict in the beginning? Do you have memories when you were like, you know, white, orange, and belts and stuff? Do you remember anything?
Well, yeah, Steve was not real strict, but then I think by the way he conducted himself and by just his commanding presence, he didn't really have to be. He wasn't as traditional as other studios. However, there were still rules. You bowed before you got on off the mat. Everyone addressed him as sir. But he was not overly strict. In fact, he was much more informal than I think other schools were. But again, because of Steve and the way he carried himself and who he is, that respect was just there. You just fell in line and abided by the rules. He told you what the rules were, and there was rarely a problem. So no, he was, and at the time I really liked that, and I still do. But yeah, no, he wasn't overly strict. Again, you know, if he told you to do something, you did it. Steve's view on things, I think, were he was very fair, extremely fair in his judgment and how he conducted himself, how he ran the school. And like I said, I don't remember very many times where people got out of line. And again, if they did, it didn't take much coaxing from Steve to get them to fall in line. One of the things I remember coming up through the ranks was looking at the higher ranking belts, thinking, oh, I can't wait till I'm there. But one of the things that really sticks out of my mind was how technically proficient all of Steve's students were. And I remember being so impressed and so amazed at that, and not being able to wait for myself to get to that place. But Steve's approach to teaching is also a little bit different. Some teachers like to talk a lot about a technique. They'll correct every little thing. You know, you do it once and okay, we'll do this and do that. You do it again and they'll tell you to do some more things. But Steve was a little bit more laid back in his teaching, and it took me a while to realize how productive that actually was. Because what Steve would do was he wouldn't correct you every time you did a technique. He would tell you the basics, make sure you understood the basics, and let you feel your way through it. And every once in a while he would throw in a comment. Okay, you need to pivot more, or you need to move at this angle a little bit more. And so you weren't overwhelmed with instruction. You didn't get too confused. He allowed you to work your way through it, and eventually you would get it, and he would get you there. That was you know, thinking back on it, that was I really liked and appreciated that method of teaching. And like I said, you know, some teachers either say too little or they say too much. It's, for me anyway, Steve always just said the right amount to get you where you needed to be and let you work yourself through it.
What stories do you remember? Any of his fights stuff? Do you remember any particular ones?
Fights?
Or sparring sessions?
Well, I'll tell you about sparring sessions with Steve. I think Steve was really at his happiest. Well, first off, he was happiest on the mat. But second off, he was happiest when he was sparring with the students, sparring with his black belts or his advanced students. He just there was a glow about it. He loved being on the mat. Loved the interaction, the combat. And, let me tell you some of the things about Steve that really make him unique. Is there are a lot of people out there who have pretty flashy kicks. There are a lot of people out there who look good on the mat. Steve really, for me, put the art in martial arts. His technique, the power that he generated when he would do anything, a punch, a kick, a wrist lock, was very impressive. And I think therein lied the beauty in what he did. The art was using very, very good technique and generating all this power, and it just looked good when he did it. There was no mistaking that. And something else I'll say about him that should never be forgotten or discarded was, I don't know of many people in this world, even professionals, who have the timing that Steve Sexton has. He had impeccable timing. And he wasn't a small person, he was a big man. Moved very quickly for a big man and had impeccable timing. Somehow he was able to see everything. Maybe he saw it in slow motion, I don't know. But he could see the big picture. And back in the day, I consider myself to be pretty quick. And what I would try to do is, his feet were very difficult to get past his feet. So any opportunity I had when I was sparring him, I would try to burst through his kicking range. At least get close enough to get a punch in. And I can't tell you how many times that I would do that, and I would have this aha moment to where it's like, aha, I'm there, and my punch would be in flight to land, thinking I'm going to finally get something in on my teacher. And
he would sidekick you at the same time.
He would either sidekick me, hook kick me, or punch me. He would interrupt my attack no matter what I did. And it was incredible. It was incredible. And, you know, I'm not the only one he did it to. He did it to everybody. And it was amazing to watch and see. Another thing that I think helped me grow as a martial artist is watching Steve. I mean, the instruction, you know, he would tell you, don't put your foot here, do this, do that. But just watching him, the simplicity in motion, the simplicity of his technique, which was another great feature of his attribute, was simplicity. Nothing was too fancy. I mean, yeah, nothing was too fancy. It was usually pretty direct and to the point, and it was very effective. And that's Steve's approach and philosophy on fighting and martial arts, period. There's been a few times where I've strayed off to try this or that, and he would bring me back to reality and say, you know, Mike, don't make it too complicated. Straightforward is always best, and or straightforward techniques are always the best. And it really shaped and molded me in my approach to martial arts. Now that's in the studio on the mat. In real life, Steve's approach was the same, whether it was dealing with people or dealing with violent altercations. I think we all know Steve ran a bar for a long time and was manager, bouncer, and so he encountered a lot of instances where he had to put his skills to use. I've witnessed a few, and a lot of them I've heard about, but the lessons that Steve taught on the mat were the same philosophies he followed in real life. Just be very direct. Simplicity in motion. Another thing that Steve would tell us is, as we all know, there are opponents of all shapes and sizes, big, small, strong. Steve would tell us, don't worry about the size. Everyone feels pain. Everyone gets affected when they get hit in different ways. And he would tell us stories of how that applied in real life. One time he told me a story of a guy who had come into his bar. He was a big guy, muscular, bigger than Steve. And the guy was, you know, he was basically being a bully. He was messing with the customers, trying to intimidate people. And so, as Steve does, again, Steve was very fair, but he had a line. And it wasn't easy to get to that line, but if you were unfortunate enough to cross that line, it was it was not a good outcome for you. So anyway, Steve tried to calm the situation, as he does, being diplomatic, offered to buy the guy a beer, say, hey, let's just have a good time here. Everyone just wants to enjoy themselves. Have a beer on me, and just relax and enjoy. Well, that wasn't this guy's intention. So I guess he figured maybe he was bigger than Steve, or mistook Steve's kindness for weakness, and proceeded to be aggressive with Steve, trying to intimidate Steve, flexing in front of Steve, saying, oh, what do you think about that? What do you think about that muscle, and this and that? And finally Steve had had enough. The guy was just being too aggressive, and Steve jumped up, punched the guy square in the face one time. The guy hit the ground, and at this point I think anybody else hearing the story would think, well, big old brawl ensued. Well, that's not what happened. This big, huge guy who was so aggressive with everyone got up and was almost in tears and asked Steve, why did you hit me? Well, Steve told him. Steve told him, you can't come in here, you mess with everyone else, you mess with me, and I tried to reason with you and you wouldn't be reasonable, so you got hit. So that's not really the end of the story. Well, I'll tell you that the guy ended up leaving. He wasn't feeling too good after being hit. Steve hit him pretty hard. The next day, a woman comes into the bar and is looking for Steve Sexton. Steve's told this, and is told that, well, he's told that this woman is looking for him. So he doesn't know what it's all about, so he talks to her and she explains to him that she is the girlfriend of the guy that Steve punched the previous night. So Steve's thinking, oh great, here it goes. I'm going to get a tongue lashing, she's going to be upset, I punched and hurt her boyfriend. But that's not what happened. What happened is the woman said, I just want to thank you for how you handled my boyfriend. He has a habit of going to bars, getting drunk, and being a bully. And up until last night, no one had ever stood up to him. And so I just want to thank you for setting him straight and letting him know that you can't get away with treating people like that.
Wow.
Right. And I think that was, Steve was like, wow. You know, he was very surprised. And the woman seemed to indicate that her boyfriend had started to have second thoughts on his behavior. So turns out Steve ended up doing the guy maybe a favor.
Wow, that's cool.
Right. So that's an instance of, or an example of Steve having to handle a situation at the bar.
Oh, that's cool.
There are other outcomes that weren't so nice. Being in a bar, especially, well, just being in a bar like that where people come in, get drunk, get stupid, somebody has to control it. Steve was that person. There were numerous instances where, you know, people would come in and cause trouble, and Steve once told me his philosophy on that was, well, before I get to that, some of the stories that Steve had told me about altercations he had at the bar, he ended up hurting the person pretty good. Knocking them out, breaking a jaw, this or that. And I asked Steve one time, you know, why do you go that far? I mean, once you know, subdue them, don't you think that that's enough? And he said, let me tell you something. He says, if I just knock them down and they go away, they're going to think about that, and they're going to get mad, and they're going to want to come back. He says, but if I send them away so that they can't come back right away, they're going to think about it a little while longer and maybe decide, maybe it's not such a good idea if I go back there and start any more trouble. Now, most of the time, I think those altercations worked out, but there are a few altercations that didn't work out. Steve had some crazy people come in who either didn't like being beat up in the bar, or they didn't like Steve or the bar for whatever reason. There was a story that Steve told me once where he was sitting at the bar and somebody walked in the back, a slight person, walked in the back and knelt down behind one of the pool tables. Steve didn't really see what was going on, but he was watching him, and then he got up and he walked over there, and turns out somebody had walked in and was pouring gasoline around the pool tables and planned on torching Steve's bar. So Steve didn't waste any time. He ran up to the guy, knocked him down. The guy got up. And Steve, I think they ended up by the payphone that was located in back, and I think Steve ended up subduing him with the phone, beat him over the head with the phone, and put him in an arm lock, and ended up calling the police, and that's how he handled that situation. I think one of the most trying times for Steve as far as getting in a fight at the bar was one time he told me that he got in a fight with a biker, a big burly guy. Trying to throw the guy out, the guy didn't want to be thrown out. So in the front of the bar there was a little entryway with not much room to move into. And turns out this guy had a buddy. So Steve is fighting with two of these big biker guys in the entryway of the bar. One guy, I think, had Steve had a hold on his lapel or his throat or something. Steve reached across, grabbed the back of his head, and was pushing on his chin to try to bulldog him or do a neck technique to take him down. The guy wasn't budging, and then all of a sudden something gave. Steve heard a crack, and the guy's neck turned, and the guy dropped. Next thing he knew, the guy's buddy had tackled him, and they had fallen out into the street out in front of the bar. They wrestle around a little bit. They start exchanging blows. Steve's punching and hitting, and next thing he knows, Steve's here's the other guy running up behind him, screaming with a bottle over his head, getting ready to hit Steve over the head. Steve does a sidestepping technique, grabs the guy's arm, grabs with his other hand, grabs him around the neck, and throws him to the ground. At this point, Steve said he was all out of wind. Steve had no more energy left. He didn't know what he was going to do. He had these two big guys that he had to contend with, and he didn't know how he was going to manage it, being out of wind, being out of energy. So I guess the three of them stood there looking at each other, wondering what was going to happen next. And finally, the two biker guys decided this wasn't going to be such an easy time, and they decided that maybe they should skedaddle. So Steve put on a bold face, even though he knew he didn't have much fight left in him, and they left, and it worked out. It worked out for Steve. I guess it goes back to Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Appear strong even when you're weak, and that worked out for Steve in that instance.
That's cool. Okay, that's good.